So turn 3 in the books here, in Global War 36. And still, through 3 turns, conflict has pretty much just been local to a couple of civil wars. And then the Italian conquest of Abyssinia on turn 1. So not a lot of conflict going on, just mostly nations gearing up for the future conflict and maneuvering their forces around, putting themselves in position once hostilities break out among the major powers. And to that end, the Germans didn't have a lot to do this last turn. They did buy 3 artillery that they put down in East Germany. And I believe they also put some infantry down in West Germany. And then they also sent a paratrooper to Spain to assist Franco's forces. So now Germany, through 3 turns in the game, they've almost got everything in place that they want here, territory bordering with Poland. They're probably going to buy a couple cavalry this turn that they'll place in East Germany. That'll probably be it. And then the forces that are currently on the board adjacent to Polish territories are what's going to go into Poland at some point here down the road. So the Germans have altogether amassed about 7 infantry, 3 artillery, a medium bomber, and 1 cavalry at this point, but the Germans will probably again add 3 cavalry this turn. And that should be sufficient to take out Poland, assuming they go ahead and attack Poland on the same turn that they use their Lightning War special move. They should be able to take out West Poland, this southern Polish territory, and then be in a position to take Warsaw on the second phase of the Lightning War turn. And that's what Germany, again, going back to Germany's initial strategy in the war, is to use their Lightning War move to take out pretty much most of Europe. They want to be in a position at the end of the turn that they use that move to have pretty much all of Europe under control, from Poland to the Atlantic, taking out France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Denmark at the very least. So to that end, Germany is devoting pretty much all their resources to ground units, other than the unit a turn they're sending to Spain. So obviously their navy is suffering as a result of that. It's just the status quo with the navy. But obviously you have limited resources in this game, a limited amount of IPPs, especially at the beginning of the game, to spend. So Germany does not want to disperse their effort necessarily by building ships, when their main goal, at least in the first part of the game, is to build up enough ground and air units to take out France and Poland on the same turn. And if you remember last game, they did do that, but especially when they went into France, it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. Now, that did leave Germany with all of Europe basically under control, but the forces that were left on the board for Germany at that point were pretty thin. But at that point, it doesn't make a huge difference, because the only adversary they really have in the game at that point is just the UK, just the British. The Americans are still usually several turns away, and Russia and Germany have signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, so they're at peace. I mean, the Russians theoretically could break the pact themselves, although I haven't really seen that happen very often. Not to mention that the Russians in my game, in the first game, had pulled almost everything away from the border, anticipating Germany coming in at some point. So if the Russians then want to turn around and attack Germany themselves and break the pact, they're not really in a position because all their units have pretty much moved into the interior of Russia, so they'd have to move everything up. So it would take a couple of turns for Russia kind of reversing course to attack Germany. So even if this game repeats itself and Germany's left with not a lot of forces on the board once their Lightning War turn is done, if they have completed the conquest of Poland and France, along with some of the other minor countries here in Europe, again, like Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, then they're only looking at the UK as their only adversary left at that point in time in the war. So the UK usually isn't in a position to be able to take advantage of Germany's temporary weakness from all the combat they just engaged in. The British definitely could have enough forces to land, let's say, back in France. But at that point in the game, Germany's usually at least doubling, maybe more than doubling the British income. And obviously, Germany has all of these factories here on the board, so they can just place units down there right away, whereas the British, unless they're using airborne units to bring over, which then means they've got to buy air transports, they've got to bring everything over on naval transport. So not only can the Germans react quicker, but they have, again, about double the income. So even if the British temporarily landed, let's say, somewhere in France, they're not going to be able to hold it. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense for Britain to try to capitalize on Germany's momentary weakness. It's just not going to be sustainable, I don't think, for the British. They really, unless the die rolls went horribly bad for Germany, the UK probably isn't realistically going to be able to land back on the continent until the US is involved, and they can kind of do a 1-2 punch. I mean, they can certainly land back on the continent on their own, but just not where they're going to be able to maintain the presence there, I don't think. Plus, the other issue the UK would run into at that point is then they're devoting all of their energy to buy transports and ground units to land back in Europe, and then leaving Italy to kind of rule the Mediterranean. I mean, at that point, Italy, again, would only have, if they decided to enter the conflict, the UK as an adversary. And now with the UK's attention totally focused on getting back into Europe to take advantage of Germany's momentary weakness, now the Mediterranean has been left wide open for Italy to kind of start going wild and taking up territory in North Africa and whatnot. So, again, Germany's thinking is pretty much just going full on, devoting all of their production to building up ground units. Again, then that means the Navy has to take a back seat for the time being. But again, with limited resources, don't want to disperse anything that's going to lessen the chance of Germany accomplishing its main goal here at the beginning of the game. So that's why the Navy has kind of been left to their own devices. As far as the Russians go, nothing really new with them. They continue to move some units up here bordering Finland. So they're going to be ready to go into Finland here fairly soon. And they've got their units bordering Iran and out in the Far East in Mongolia. So the British, they went ahead and built another minor factory they placed in South Africa, and they put a fighter down there as well. And they're kind of just in a holding pattern. They've got their 2 fleets at either end of the Mediterranean, kind of boxing the Italians in. The French, they built a couple of artillery and an infantry that were put down in Paris. And they also moved a couple units up into Alsace-Lorraine. That's where the Germans are going to have to come through if they want to take Paris on the Lightning War turn, because the French have went ahead and left at least 1 unit in every territory in France. So the Germans just can't simply drop a Fallschirmjäger in an empty territory. I mean, they could still obviously engage in combat in that territory, but no territories are currently empty. And the French as well have a couple of fleets built up either in the Med or just outside of the Mediterranean. As far as the United States, again, they saved their money. Really nothing to do but tech rolls. Now, someone had asked in the comments why save money. I'm not sure if that was directed at a specific country or a country in general. But as far as the U.S. goes, they're only getting $6 a turn right now. So anything that costs obviously more than $6, they would have to save their money at least one turn to carry over to be able to purchase a unit that costs more than 6 IPP to begin with. But also just the fact that last game they had saved up a lot of money, not every single IPP a turn, but they'd saved up most of it each turn. So by the time they entered the conflict, they were able to drop a bunch of units on the board right away. They did put a few units on the production chart, some of the capital ships that take multiple turns to produce. But as far as saving money, if it doesn't look like that nation is going to be in the conflict anytime soon, and they're collecting such a little amount of money each turn as it is, just save at least part of it, maybe in the case of the U.S., again, all of it, to carry over so that they do have then enough IPPs on a turn to buy a more expensive unit, or just continue to save for the turn when they're going to possibly be in the conflict altogether. As far as Italy, they sent an infantry unit to Spain. They upgraded a militia in northern Italy, and then they put a major factory down on the production chart, and that's going to go in northern Italy once that's completed. Other than that, everyone kind of just status quo over here on the European side of the map. In the Spanish Civil War, Franco's forces were boxed up right in Madrid, but they were able to take they broke out, were able to take a couple of territories off the Russian-backed forces. So right now, it's pretty even in terms of what each side has. Franco's forces have a paratrooper, an infantry, and 3 artillery, and the Russian-backed forces have 3 infantry and 2 artillery. And it's a 4-2 breakdown in favor of the Russian-backed forces in terms of territory. So the Spanish Civil War is still anybody's contest, probably about 50-50 right now. Germany will definitely send another unit here at the start of turn 4 to try to maybe tip the balance a little bit into Franco's favor. In the Pacific, again, not a lot going on. The Japanese, they built another transport because they still have a nice stack of men in Japan itself, so they're going to start moving them around. They also brought a couple destroyers loaded with 1 infantry each down here to the Marshall Islands. So again, Japan's got the 2 fleets broken up. Each fleet has significant ground units with it, so that when Japan decides to invade a country, they'll be in a good position to, with the ground forces, to be able to take control of that country. They do activate Siam here in January of 39, so that's coming up in another year. So I would think at this point that maybe it wouldn't be until January of 39, maybe even the January or the July 39 turn, if Japan is going to go after the Far East Command as their first target, if they can have Siam aligned and under control, the following turn, their planes could be based in Siam and land back in Siam after attacking Calcutta. So it might be July 39 when we could potentially see Japan go after the Far East Command. Again, that's the strategy they're pursuing, staying out of China, and they're going to go ahead and focus on one of these powers down here in the South Pacific, try to completely take one, if not both, out between Anzac and Far East Command before the U.S. can enter the conflict, so that they're not looking at potentially a 5-on-1 situation once the U.S. enters. I mean, if they don't knock out any one power, you've potentially got the Far East Command, Anzac, whoever is victorious in the Chinese Civil War, whether it's the KMT or the CCP, potentially Russia and the United States for sure. So that's at least 4 to 5 opponents. If you haven't taken out any one of them, by the time the U.S. enters, and the U.S. alone doubles up what you can produce usually per turn, Japan's going to find themselves in a lot of trouble like they did last game. So they're trying to switch things up a little bit and go heavy for probably the Far East Command once they enter the conflict. And as far as in China, the CCP, again, didn't have success with either of their roles, their warlord influence role or their recruitment role. So the CCP had retreated back to, now they're down to just one territory. The KMT moved up. So now the KMT has 2 territories adjacent to this last CCP territory with a total of probably about a dozen infantry. So I can see the KMT going after and trying to finish off the CCP this turn, unless the communists are successful with their warlord role. And so this is kind of a reverse from game number 1. And it's all about, really, for the CCP, their influence and recruitment roles. So the one territory they start the game with is just worth 2 IPP. So 2 IPP really isn't going to get you much per turn. The CCP is really reliant on getting those warlord influence roles to go their way, so they can add not only the territory but the forces of the various warlords to their military. And in the first game, they got really lucky, and it seemed like one turn after another they successfully influenced another warlord. And obviously, it's cumulative, so each territory that you have under control, that just adds 1 more to your die roll. So as you recruit as you influence each warlord, you're increasing your chances on the subsequent turn to influence another one. So it's kind of like a snowball effect, and that just rolled right over the KMT. But then conversely, if you're not getting those rolls as a CCP, you can't hope to, match up with the KMT, both in terms of money. They collect 6 per turn, so you're tripled up on IPP, and just in terms of the military units that KMT start the game with, probably about 2.5 to 3 times what the CCP has. So if the CCP isn't getting those rolls, they really don't have much of a chance. And in this game, they haven't got them yet. So the KMT has really got the CCP backed up into a corner here. We'll see if they can finish them off this turn. Another question I had about the KMT was, why had I bought all infantry for the first couple of turns instead of cavalry? Now, cavalry attacks better than infantry, but defends weaker. And at the time, in the first couple of turns, when the KMT was buying all infantry, the CCP had taken Szechuan and were kind of on a little bit of an offensive role. So the KMT was more worried about defense at that point. So that's why I was buying all infantry. But now that the KMT has seemed to have gotten the upper hand and are going to go on the offensive themselves, probably switch that up and buy the unit that has the better offensive statistics, which is the cavalry. So that's how things look at the end of turn number 3. As far as the tech goes, some good rolls. The Germans are up to 4 stage 2 techs, and the US and the Russians actually are up to 3 each. So all 3 factions in the game have had some pretty good tech rolls. So we'll see how things shake out heading after turn number 4 here. Don't expect a lot of combat, except for, again, in China and in Spain.